Welcome to AVANT Technology Insights. I'm your host, Ken Presti, Research Vice President of AVANT Research and Analytics. The link between solving business challenges and cutting-edge technologies has become tighter and more complex than ever before. In this podcast series, we delve into how enterprise decision makers can leverage SD-WAN, IT security, unified communications as a service, and a host of other SaaS opportunities towards greater operational efficiency and higher success. We bring you the foremost experts in their respective fields to help you understand and assess the opportunities at hand. So please buckle up and let's begin. Today's episode focuses on IT security, specifically setting up your infrastructure, access control, authentication, encryption, GDPR, and more. My guest is a technology executive who has built core competencies around designing, securing, and implementing highly available and fault-tolerant public and hybrid cloud architectures, wide-area networks, high-density and hybrid cloud data center deployments, and voice-over IP telephony. He holds multiple certifications from Cisco, Amazon Web Services, Microsoft, and Fortinet. He's currently EVP and Network-Cloud Architect at Shamrock Consulting Group, a trusted advisor to enterprise IT leaders. He says he's had the privilege of working on large-scale IT projects with some of the largest brands in the world, and it's my privilege to welcome to the program Ben Ferguson. You know, going back even just a few years ago, it seemed as though security kind of got short shrift, especially among the companies that hadn't been hit yet. More recently, it seems like, given the wide variety and the, increased numbers of attacks going on, people seem like they understand it better. And I'm wondering if you're seeing the customers becoming more sophisticated and aware. And if so, what impact has that had on their budgets?
Yeah, so my response is really all over the map. We see, I'd say overall, maybe on the large enterprise, we're seeing a better understanding around how to create, best security practices. On the midsize and SMBs, we see a ton of negligence, and people, I've had C-levels of companies say, we don't store social security numbers or credit cards in any of our databases, so we're fine. And that's pretty scary because that's only a small segment of the attack surface. So just to give a couple stats here, right? So 2018, cybercrime was a $1.5 trillion marketplace on the dark web, and that caused $3 trillion in damages to businesses globally. And that's expected to jump to about $6 trillion in 2021. And so if you do some quick math, right, a $1.5 trillion, black market that causes $3 trillion in damage, that's an unsustainable, marketplace for the world economy. It's like, if you're trying to make a business selling $100 pairs of jeans and, a certain percentage of those are stolen and then sold on eBay for $50, right? We can quickly realize that that's not a scalable business, and it's completely unsustainable. So yeah, we all as a as a whole world need to improve upon our security postures.
So if we look at security as kind of a high stakes game of whack-a-mole, if you will, the good guys do one thing and the bad guys do something else to get around it. And obviously the bad guys have been pretty successful given the growth numbers that you just mentioned. How do you go about figuring out some way to protect yourself? Is that even possible?
So, right, we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what, for example, Russian state actors or Chinese state actors have in their top secret labs. They're really, really good at evading, leaving footprints, if you will. So yeah, it is definitely a game of whack-a-mole. But if you were to talk about realistic, easy ways that are going to reduce your probability of getting hacked by, making up a number, 99%. It's a couple components, right? So one is an overarching principle of least privilege, right? And it's basically not giving any one user or any application access to anything beyond what it needs to do its job, right? So think of it as like the opposite of how you want to treat salespeople. Salespeople, you want to give all of the tools, all of the intellectual property, everything they can to get them to sell more stuff. When it comes to business data, you need to do the opposite, and that's only grant access to certain portions of databases or certain applications that people need to do their job at a minimum. And so that's the principle of least privilege. On top of that, setting up your infrastructure with things like role-based access controls. So that gives granular controls around who can access what. ACLs or access control lists, which is really around what pieces of applications can access other pieces of applications through API or whatever. And then there's authentication, which is really around creating secure means for users and applications to access applications or data, and making sure you have fine-tuned controls over that. And then the last and most important is encryption, right? So if you look at two major hacks were British Airways and Marriott. And these came up because they were the two of the three biggest GDPR fines. GDPR, by the way, has been pretty lackluster in enforcement. There's only been 12 fines in 2 years. So I think we both know that there weren't just 12 hacks in Europe in the last 2 years. So it's been minimally enforced. But so British Airways had 50,000 unencrypted customer records stolen, right? Marriott had 8 million credit card and 5 million 8 million credit cards and 5 million customer records stolen. Again, unencrypted. So encrypting your databases is something that's so important. And I understand in the on-prem world, right, getting RSA licenses and different orchestration software can be extremely expensive and prohibitive. But contrast that to AWS or Azure or Google. Let's say we want to build a SQL database from scratch right now, or import a SQL database to one of the top 3 cloud providers. I literally have to go in and manually configure or turn off encryption because it comes standard, and there's no additional fee for that. So I think the cloud is actually sort of our hidden savior in creating better security around databases, which are a big target for hackers, because those contain the gold data that they're trying to get and sell on the dark web.
But it's also true that cloud security is kind of a shared responsibility. At least that's what a lot of people in the industry tell me. When you look at a cloud environment and you're going to do your parts as an agent or an enterprise customer or an enterprise user, I should say, to keep up your end of that security piece in that cloud environment, what are some of the things that you need to do or at least look at?
Yeah, great question. So let's contrast, on-prem versus cloud in terms of security, right? So on-prem, there's on-prem as a whole kind of array of different configurations and stuff. But let's go with the legacy on-prem model, which is applications and data were only accessible when you were physically on the local area network and not accessible over the internet, right? That's pretty much eclipsed by companies building out their own virtualized private clouds to support multiple locations, remote workers, and everything. So really, everything's almost everything meaningful for the way a business conducts itself is accessible over the internet by means of creating accessibility for those users. It's, as I said, it's extremely painstaking and expensive to create role-based access controls, granular access control lists between different services when you're in the on-prem or even private cloud environment. And so that's what's very cost prohibitive. But if you flip to the pros, is that everything is protected behind a firewall that you manage. And so you're less of a public destination target, but you're still a target in itself. And what you're seeing is weaker security behind the firewall. Contrast that to cloud. Um, I mean, if you've built anything in AWS or Azure or Google, you would know that you're going to get a ton of alerts on like AWS CloudWatch. If you don't have identity access management, RBAC, and ACLs configured on your applications, you're going to get errors. It's going to be annoying. On the on-prem side, you don't get those errors unless you have an expensive orchestration and security software on there. So I would say, on the legacy side, on-prem could be more secure, but on the cloud side, it's just for building modern applications, it's just harder to not secure your data in the right way when you're on the public cloud, because they have all of these features built in, and you literally have to turn them off to not encrypt your database, for example. And so that's really my message around cloud, is that people perceive it as being less secure, but unless you mess with it, it should be more secure.
Okay, so I can see that there's a kind of an aspect of defense in depth, as people in the industry like to say, but also a defense in breadth as you go from the data center to the cloud and look at all those sorts of things. With this in mind, given both environments, how would you characterize the challenge inherent to most agents, most trusted advisors, in terms of planning security for their customers in an environment that changes as rapidly as security does?
Yeah. So my message to the agent community is, I empathize that security is not as easy as just learning the difference between different internet circuits and different hosted VoIP plans, where you have, it's pretty two-dimensional, right? It's like, okay, what do you want? The 50, the 100, the 200, the 500, or the gig circuit today, Mr. Customer, right? That's easy and that's transactional. But security is a moving target. It requires a lot of constant, continual education and learning, and it's a bigger challenge. But if you're going to serve your customers right, you have to learn it. You have to learn at least enough to know kind of the biggest vulnerabilities. And the biggest beef I have with the agent community is in SD-WAN. We're moving from VPLS and MPLS, hub and spoke networks. From a networking standpoint, right? There was generally, one or two or three ingress egress points, always protected by firewalls, right? And I think the agent community was pretty good and diligent about, asking about how they're securing their ingress egress points. And it flipped to 2019, you have all these cowboys selling these unsecured SD-WAN networks where you're going from one, two, or three ingress egress points to a full distributed network where every single site now is open to the internet. And they think, okay, as long as we create encrypted VPN tunnels between our sites, anything in flight is secured, but in flight is less than half the battle. How many big hacks do you hear about? Oh, someone hijacked an email in flight, or hijacked a VPN session in flight. These things don't happen. It's really around, at rest is your big surface area of attack, and that data at rest is no longer behind a firewall. It's absolutely insane to me. And so the agent community needs to step their game up when talking about distributed wide area networks.
Okay, so in that situation, do you see a lot of agents striking alliances with, MSSPs to handle that part of it so that they don't have to? And then, of course, you've got the obvious concerns around account control and things like that. So that's far from a perfect solution, but certainly one that could probably get them closer to true security for their customers.
Yeah, and that's what ultimately needs to happen, right? If they're too lazy to go about learning a whole new industry that's changing faster than probably any other industry that exists, then yeah, you have to partner with a reputable MSSP. Try and get as close to the best as you can, because the difference between first and 10th place is a big gap. So partner with the best MSSPs. I would highly recommend that. If nothing else than to capture additional revenue, you'll be able to sleep at night better knowing that you're doing right by your customers at the same time.
But I got to think that one of the issues that comes into play here is the shortage of trained personnel. I mean, we keep seeing coverage every day about the relative dearth of skilled security people, given the number of jobs that are out there, which makes it harder and harder to hang on to skilled people as they become more and more expensive.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. I mean, if you think about small and mid-sized business here in Los Angeles, I believe as Modus put out a report. So the average annual income for their total out the door package per year in Los Angeles, where I live, is $157,000 a year, right? And that's a cost center job to the business. It's not revenue generating. It's really just mitigating risk. It's an insurance policy person. And so, I would say most small businesses can't afford that. Many mid-sized businesses can't afford that. Plus, then you have to think about your ratio of SOC employee to headcount. And then, generally speaking, security engineers are just like any other engineers. They're going to be competency specialists at one or two or three things, and then hopefully a somewhat jack of all trades. But they're if they're masters of database security, are they good at endpoint? If they're good at endpoint, are they good at behavioral analysis? If they're really good at threat hunting, are they good at infrastructure security and creating ACLs? And so that's where you're going to run into issues. You can't just say, oh, we hired one or two or three SOC employees, boxes checked off, we're good. That's where MSSPs become very valuable, because they can build a deep bench of competency experts. And if a MSSP hires 50 SOC employees at 157K a year, they know they're going to be able to get a ton more juice out of them, because they can overlay their competency expertise across multiple accounts versus just having one person per one company. So that's where I think the MSSP value really shines.
Okay, so let's say you walk in the door of a new customer. They're not greenfield in and of their own right, but they're greenfield to you. So you're getting the lay of the land here and figuring out what they need. How are you going to go about assessing what their security posture looks like and what it is you need to do? What are the big pieces of that?
Yeah, so I would say it's a mistake to go in first meeting and just say, hey, what are your security vulnerabilities? No one's going to give those to you. And the fact of the matter is, people don't know what they don't know anyway. So the important thing is get a map of what their network looks like, what their infrastructure looks like, what their applications look like, and then you want to start, understanding the layer 1 through layer 7 vulnerabilities, and saying, hey, did you think about this? Or hey, so how do you secure this database? Or what's your ACL solution for this database here? Is everything encrypted? What's your authentication methods? How are you protecting against 0-day, 0-hour type threats? And that's what's going to open up the conversation to, hey, either this is our plan and this is what we have in place, and you can kind of you politely tell them if that's a good or bad plan, or if it's a mediocre plan, and maybe give some suggestions on improving that. But also figuring out where their blind spots are, and politely making some suggestions, and in the form of, hey, have you thought about this? Have you thought of, here's an interesting thing that happened to XYZ company, and this is how the user was able to do the SQL injection and then move laterally throughout the network, yada yada yada, and it's kind of going through that playbook where now the decision makers sort of tasked with thinking through these different scenarios that aren't highly unlikely. These are highly probable scenarios, and figuring out where their blind spots are. And then you, as the consultant for the company, can go in and make some good suggestions and figuring out how to implant it into their budget. The agent community has a luxury in which, we have a large breadth of services that we cover, right? We have telecommunications, we have data communications, we have data center. And so, when you identify areas that, companies might be undersourced or underspending in their security posture, we have the luxury of, hey, let's save you some money on voice or save some money on network, and steal from Peter, give to Paul, and bring some OpEx budget or some CapEx budget into this area where we think we can harden security.
Okay, so to what extent do you find groups within the company who may feel a certain amount of threat from that? You may have IT and the CISO on board, but you've got other people with different imperatives who may not want to budget in this direction because at the end of the day, while they recognize, at least on a prima facie level, that security is very important, they also see it as detrimental to the bottom line in that the money that they spend on security isn't going to something else. Do you find yourself swimming upstream against that?
Uh, I haven't run into it too much, but as I identified earlier on in the talk, right, a dollar of black market value generally costs a business $2 in damages, right? That's an easy math problem that says security should pay for itself in terms of downside, loss prevention and risk, right? If you had a clothing store selling $100 jeans that were gonna, if someone stole them, it would garner $50 on the black market, right? You'd probably have security cameras, those little security tags, so that someone steals them, the door beeps, and you potentially even staff some sort of loss prevention security personnel, right? If that was a problem, then you'd be solving that quickly because you can see the tangible loss. With businesses, there's definitely a lot more abstraction when it comes to data. It's one thing if you get, a crypto lock hack where you lose all the information to a database, or you lose access to a database, and salespeople can't sell for a week, right? There's a tangible loss. Or workstation gets malware but doesn't go anywhere past that, right? It's lost productivity for that one person. And so there's definitely a level of abstraction where it's tougher to forecast tangible losses. But as consultants, we have to go and run through these scenarios and agree on possible numbers that that could be downsides. It's downsides to the business.
You mentioned GDPR a little bit ago, and you were saying that there hasn't been a whole lot of enforcement of that. But, when we also hear about people who are kind of stressing out about how to do business in Europe these days, especially if they're US based companies and they've got one set of imperatives on this side of the ocean and another set of imperatives on the other side of the ocean. Um, Help me unpack that in terms of number one, that issue, number two, the enforcement of it, and number three, the potential that that enforcement lack may move in a different direction at any point in time, depending on who it is that's driving it.
Yeah, absolutely. So with GDPR, that's kind of the first initial framework we've seen globally, which puts the responsibility in the hands of corporations to secure their data, and not just go wild selling off customer data. Because I think people are sick of it. The Cambridge Analytica Facebook scandal, where I'd say a lot of Americans feel like they got duped and they had their data stolen from them. And, a certain percentage of people think that an election was completely swayed because of this. We're starting to see real tangible effects from what happens when data is put in the wrong place. And so we do need to have these frameworks in place. But yeah, GDPR is I guess, compared to what we're seeing in America, right? A $20 million or 20 million euro or 4% of global revenue fine for data breaches. That's very significant. And so companies are highly paying attention to this. They also need to have, clear means for customers to opt out or be forgotten or not have to manually consent to targeted ads. I think these are all good things because I think people want to own their own data, and people feel like their data is an extension of their identity, and they don't want to have that just sold off on an open market. And so on that side of the pond, right, there's GDPR. And in January 2020, on this side of the pond in California, we're going to have CCPA, or the California Consumer Privacy Act. It's in typical American fashion, the costs are far less, right? We're trying to punish businesses less, and that might be because America's is and probably will be the largest target for cyber attacks. I want to say it was about 40 some odd percent of 46% of cyber attacks last year were against U.S. Companies or individuals. So we're, I think, starting off a little bit low, and then we'll continue to ratchet it up from there as we give businesses a chance to harden their security practices and invest in cybersecurity. But the fines are between $2,500 and $7,500 per breach, which is nowhere near a 20 million euro or 4% of global revenue. But because the fines are much less, I would be shocked if California alone didn't have 10x the amount of enforcement as GDPR.
It'll be interesting to see how that rolls out. So given the compliance issues and given the overall threat and given the relative shortage of talent and things of this nature, if you had to give an enterprise IT buyer and decision maker one piece of advice for how to go about securing their infrastructure, securing their data, and keeping all that safe, what would you tell them to do?
First step, penetration tests and social engineering tests. Just see where they're at as a company. It's a white hat, full assessment. I'd say the average cost between $10,000 and $25,000. You have some companies that'll do them for free. I don't know. You might get what you pay for. It's probably just a quick assessment as part of the sales process. So I would go for more of a fiduciary engagement for a penetration and social engineering test, just to see where you're at. That's the best gut check you can start with. From there, I would say partner with a company that is laser focused on security, not just your small mom and pop IT company that sells firewalls and Norton antivirus. You're going to want a company with a true SOC offering where they're able to deploy and manage everything from the lowest end of network firewalls, endpoint protection, and have some at least rudimentary level of machine learning for threat hunting, and then have some sort of correlation engine as a service. They can spit out alerts with different severity levels and have a great SLA on responding to said alerts.
All right, excellent. Ben Ferguson, Vice President and Network Architect at Shamrock Consulting Group. Thank you for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Ken.
You've been listening to AVANT Technology Insights, featuring information and opinions on how key technologies can be leveraged to solve business problems. AVANT Technology Insights is a service of AVANT Communications, a platform for IT decision-making. All opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the guests and the host. For more information, please feel free to download our research reports and other resources at www.goavant.net. That's www.goavant.net. For AVANT Research and Analytics, this is Ken Presti.